If you open the book of Genesis to chapter 6, right before the entire world drowns, there is this blink and you miss it sentence. And it has completely baffled scholars, theologians, and, just casual readers for thousands of years.
Oh, absolutely. It is the ultimate narrative roadblock.
Right. Because you're reading along, you're following the genealogies of early humanity, and suddenly the text just casually mentions that angels came down from heaven.
Yeah.
And married human women. And gave birth to a race of legendary, potentially cannibalistic giants.
And then the Bible just moves on.
Yes.
Yes.
It just moves on. It drops this massive cosmic bombshell of an anomaly and then immediately pivots to Noah building a boat.
It really does. You're tracing the descent of Adam, and everything feels relatively grounded in this ancient agrarian context. Yeah. And out of nowhere, you are just hit with this mythological explosion.
It's so jarring.
It is. The text opens up this terrifying can of worms regarding the boundaries between the divine and the mortal, and then it violently slams it shut, leaving the reader just standing there completely bewildered.
Exactly. And if you've ever read that and thought, wait a minute, I think I missed a chapter, you're not alone. So that is our mission today.
A very ambitious mission.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we were exploring the foundational creation and flood stories of the Bible. But we are going to drastically expand that universe by looking at a mysterious, long-lost text, the Book of Enoch.
Which is such a fascinating document.
It really is. I mean, if Genesis is the theatrical release of a movie that had a bunch of scenes chopped out for time and audience comfort, the Book of Enoch is the director's extended cut.
That's a great way to put it. And looking at that extended cut is absolutely essential if we want to truly understand the worldview of the ancient Near East.
Right.
To do this properly, we have to view these texts not just as a set of ancient rules or simple morality tales. We have to see them as dynamic, interconnected traditions.
Oh, okay. Let's unpack this, because we have a fascinating stack of sources in front of us today to help you, the listener, navigate all of this.
We do.
On one side, we are pulling from the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. Specifically, we're diving deep into the scholarly introductions to the Pentateuch in the book of Genesis. And then, to fill in the massive gaps, we are using a comprehensive translation and commentary of the complete Book of Enoch. Specifically, the Standard English Version translated by Dr. J. Winter.
And bringing these two specific sources into conversation with each other is vital.
Why is that?
Well, the standard biblical text gives us the canonical, accepted framework that billions of people know today, but Dr. Winter's translation of Enoch gives us the apocalyptic, suppressed context.
The stuff that got left out.
Right. The context that those early biblical writers and their original audiences, mind you, actually took for granted. Without Enoch, Genesis 6 is just a bizarre mystery.
Yeah, we're a little footnote.
Exactly. But with Enoch, Genesis 6 becomes the inciting incident for the total destruction of the ancient world.
Okay, but before we can understand what got cut out of the story, we kind of have to understand how the final version of the story was actually assembled in the first place.
We have to talk about the Pentateuch.
Right, the foundation of the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah.
The first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Now, if you grew up in a traditional religious environment, you were probably taught that Moses sat down, maybe in a tent in the wilderness somewhere, and wrote all 5 of these books, start to finish.
Yeah, that was the unquestioned bedrock of tradition for centuries. It was held fiercely by both the synagogue and the early church.
Unquestioned.
Oh, fiercely unquestioned. The tradition of Mosaic authorship was so intense and so literal that classical rabbis actually debated how he could have written the very end of Deuteronomy.
Oh, right, because the final chapter of Deuteronomy narrates Moses' own death and burial.
Exactly, which is a pretty neat trick for an author to pull off.
Yeah, writing about your own funeral from the grave.
Right. So to reconcile that, some traditions suggested that Joshua wrote the last few verses, but others insisted Moses wrote it himself. The idea was that he dictated his own death scene while weeping, writing the final words with his tears.
Wow. I mean, that is an incredibly beautiful, poetic image.
It is. It provides this neat, tidy origin story for the foundational text of the Abrahamic faiths.
But the text itself, when you take off the theological glasses and just, read it closely, it starts to push back against that tidy origin story.
It absolutely does.
Our source brings up a brilliant example of this from a 12th century scholar named Abraham ibn Ezra. Now, Ibn Ezra was a devout man, but he was also a very careful reader.
A very sharp eye for detail.
Yeah. He noticed this seemingly innocent throwaway line in Genesis 12, verse 6. It's referring to the time when Abraham is wandering through the land, And the text says, at that time, the Canaanites were in the land.
Which is one of those verses you just skim right over.
Right, you wouldn't even think twice about it.
Yeah.
But Ibn Ezra realized the phrasing at that time is a massive chronological tell.
Yes, because it implies that for the author who is physically holding the pen and writing the text, the Canaanites were no longer in the land.
Exactly. They were a thing of the past. But during the time of Moses, the Canaanites were very much still there.
Fighting the Canaanites was the entire point of the Book of Joshua, which comes after Moses dies.
Right, so it is a subtle anachronism, a textual fingerprint proving that the person writing or editing that specific sentence lived centuries later than Moses.
It's a great catch.
I love details like that. It's like watching a movie set in the 1950s and catching a glimpse of a modern smartphone sitting on a table in the background. It breaks the illusion.
That's a perfect analogy. And as time went on, especially as critical thinking and rationalism took hold with Enlightenment thinkers like Baruch Spinoza, scholars started noticing more and more of these smartphones on the table, so to speak.
Like what kind of things?
Well, there were sudden shifts in vocabulary, duplicate stories, obvious contradictions, which leads us to a massive paradigm shift in biblical scholarship that our source outlines, the documentary hypothesis.
Okay, the documentary hypothesis. This fundamentally changed how we read the Bible, didn't it?
Completely. It is the idea that the Pentateuch is not a single, unified book by one author. Instead, it's a brilliant compilation of different source documents.
Okay.
These documents were woven together by later editors, whom scholars call redactors, and this heavy editing process likely reached its peak during or shortly after the Babylonian exile.
Okay, let's pause right there because the Babylonian exile is crucial context for you to understand. Why were they suddenly so obsessed with editing all these texts together at that specific moment in history?
You have to think about the trauma of the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE. The Israelites have just been conquered by Babylon.
Right.
Their city, Jerusalem, is burned. Their temple, the literal physical house of their god, is completely destroyed. The elites and the priesthood are dragged off into exile in Babylon.
Their entire national identity has been shattered.
Exactly. I mean, in the ancient world, if your god's house is destroyed, did your god lose? Did your god die?
Right. They're facing a total existential crisis. If they don't figure out a way to preserve their culture, they are going to just disappear into the melting pot of the Babylonian Empire.
Yes. So, in exile, without a physical temple to center their religion, their texts became their portable temple.
Oh, I like that. A portable temple.
The priests and scribes frantically gathered all the surviving scrolls, the oral traditions, the tribal histories, stuff from the northern kingdom that had fallen earlier and from the southern kingdom of Judah.
And they just mashed them all together.
Well, they took these different, sometimes competing traditions and painstakingly stitched them together. They were trying to create a unified national history to remind themselves of who they were.
And the documentary hypothesis identifies 4 main source texts that these redactors used. They're usually referred to by a neat little acronym, right? J, E, P, and D.
Yes, J, E, P, and D.
Let's break those down because they are basically the 4 distinct voices you hear arguing with each other in the text.
That's a good way to frame it. They are categorized by their distinct vocabularies, their writing styles, and their underlying theological perspectives. So the J source is the oldest.
Okay.
It's named for its consistent use of the divine name Yahweh or Jahweh in 19th century German scholarship, which is where the letter J actually comes from.
Got it. And the E source.
Then you have the E source, which prefers the generic Hebrew word for God, Elohim.
Okay, so J and E, and then the P and D sources.
P stands for the priestly source. As the name suggests, this was written by the priesthood.
So they care about the rules.
Oh, heavily. It is heavily focused on order, dates, massive genealogies, and the specifics of ritual law. They care deeply about structure.
And the D source.
Finally, D stands for the Deuteronomist. This source is mostly confined to the Book of Deuteronomy and is known for its highly rhetorical preaching style.
Lots of sermons.
Very sermon-like. It focuses heavily on the covenant and the idea that obedience brings blessing, while disobedience brings curses.
So, reading Genesis is less like reading a novel by one single author and more like reading a massive Wikipedia page that has been carefully edited together by different scholars over centuries.
That is a remarkably apt analogy, yes.
Like you have the J guy adding his ancient campfire stories, P guy coming in to add all the dates and family trees, and a redactor trying to weave it into a single cohesive article without deleting the important contributions of the others.
Exactly. And just like a massive, heavily edited Wikipedia page, you sometimes get repetitive sections, overlapping timelines, and incredibly abrupt shifts in tone.
Because they didn't want to lose anything.
Right. The redactors were not trying to create a modern historical textbook that reads smoothly from A to Z. They were trying to preserve the multifaceted voices of their ancestors.
So if two different traditions had a story about how creation happened, the redactor didn't throw one away.
No, he kept them both.
Which is incredibly obvious when you look at the very first 2 chapters of the Bible. Most people don't realize this, but there isn't just one creation story in Genesis, there are 2.
And they are completely, profoundly different.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
They represent entirely different ancient worldviews. The first creation account, which runs from Genesis 1 verse 1 through the first few verses of chapter 2, is the classic one we all know.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Exactly. This is attributed to the priestly source, the P writer.
And you can really feel that priestly obsession with order in that chapter.
Oh, it's highly symmetrical. It's essentially a poem. Day 1 corresponds to day 4, day 2 to day 5.
And the God in this version is a transcendent, incredibly powerful, cosmic deity who creates simply by speaking. Let there be light, and the universe obeys.
Yes. He doesn't touch anything. He's just hovering over the waters.
And in this version, man and woman are created simultaneously on the 6th day as the grand finale after all the animals are already made.
Right. It is a story of ultimate, pristine cosmic order.
But then, right after the 7th day of rest, you get to Genesis 2, verse 4, and suddenly the tone completely shifts.
Because we are now reading the Yahwistic or J source.
And the God of the J source is utterly different. He is no longer a distant, booming voice commanding the cosmos from the void.
No, he is anthropomorphic.
Yeah.
He has human-like qualities. He is getting his hands dirty.
Yeah, in this version, the earth is just a dry wasteland. God literally forms man from the dust of the ground like a potter working with wet clay and physically breathes into his nostrils.
And this completely contradicts the timeline of the first chapter. God creates the animals after the man.
Right. He brings them to the man to see what he will name them.
Yes. And then, almost as an afterthought, because the man is lonely and none of the animals are a good match, God puts the man asleep, opens his side, and builds woman from his rib.
And this God doesn't just hover over the universe. The text explicitly says he physically walks in the garden in the cool of the evening.
It is a profound, jarring contrast. You have the cosmic, unapproachable God of the priestly source and the intimate, hands-on gardener God of the Yahwistic source.
But the redactors kept both.
Yes. The exilic redactors who put the Bible together saw these 2 wildly different accounts and placed them side by side. To them, both narratives contained vital, complementary theological truths.
That God is both transcendently powerful and deeply personally involved.
Exactly.
Okay, so that establishes the patchwork nature of the text. We have creation, we have the garden, the fall, the first murder with Cain and Abel, the long list of who begat whom.
And then we hit Genesis chapter 6.
Yes. And if the shift between creation stories was a bump in the road, Genesis 6 is driving off a cliff.
It really is. It is arguably one of the most debated and heavily scrutinized passages in all of antiquity.
I want to read this directly because the whiplash is real. The text says, quote, "When people began to multiply on the face of the ground, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that they were fair, and they took wives for themselves of all that they chose."
Okay, weird, but let's keep going.
Right. It continues, "The Nephilims were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went in to the daughters of humans who bore children to them. These were the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown."
So we have a bizarre intermingling of the heavenly and the earthly.
Yeah, and what is the immediate result of this?
Well, literally the very next verse 5 says, "The Lord saw that the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually."
And the Lord was sorry that he had made humankind on the earth.
So the Lord said, "I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have created."
And boom, we are building an ark.
It is a staggering escalation. Verse 4, heroes and warriors are born from a mysterious union. Verse 5, God decides to commit global omnicide and wipe the slate clean.
The narrative gap there is so massive you could sail an ark through it. I mean, the text mentions sons of God, which traditionally meant angels or divine beings in ancient Hebrew cosmology, marrying human women. It mentions Nephilim, which translates to giants or the fallen ones. And somehow, This highly specific supernatural event triggers the total destruction of the ecosystem. But Genesis gives us absolutely zero details.
None at all.
Wait, I have to push back here. If this is the inciting incident for the destruction of the entire world, why did the redactors cut the details out? Why leave us with 4 vague verses?
That is the million-dollar question. Many scholars believe the redactors actually did know the full story, but they found it deeply uncomfortable.
Because it was too weird.
Well, think about the priestly redactors who loved order. They likely hated the idea of angels rebelling and having sex with humans. It made the divine realm look chaotic and messy.
So they just gave it the absolute minimum amount of space necessary to acknowledge the ancient tradition and then rushed past it to get to the story of Noah's righteousness.
Exactly, they sanitized it.
They scrubbed the cosmic crime scene.
Yes, they did.
But to find out what actually happened at that crime scene, we have to leave the canonical Bible that sits in hotel nightstands today and open a book that the later church and synagogue authorities literally banned, cursed, and tried to bury in the sands of time.
We have to turn to the lost prequel.
The Book of Enoch.
The history of this book is almost as wild as the contents inside it.
Our source details this incredible journey. This text, technically known as 1 Enoch, wasn't some fringe cult pamphlet. It was originally penned in a Semitic language, likely Aramaic, centuries before the time of Christ.
And it was massively popular. It was widely read, deeply respected, and highly influential among early Jewish and Christian communities.
How influential are we talking?
Its influence cannot be overstated. If you look at the canonical New Testament, the Book of Jude directly quotes the Book of Enoch.
Really? Like word for word?
Yes. Jude verses 14 and 15 explicitly say, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about them. See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone. The author of Jude is quoting Enoch chapter 1 word for word. The early Christians clearly viewed this text as authoritative prophecy.
And the source points out that Jesus himself seemingly referenced its theological framework.
He did. There is that famous moment in the Gospels, the Transfiguration in Luke 9:35, where a voice from the cloud says, "This is my son, the elect one. Hear him."
Now, the phrase elect one isn't super common in the Old Testament, is it?
It isn't, but our source notes that the term elect one is found 14 times in the Book of Enoch.
Oh, wow.
Yes, it was Enoch's specific title for a coming cosmic judge who would set the world right. When the early Christians heard that, they knew exactly what cinematic universe they were in.
They recognized the reference.
Early church fathers like Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and Tertullian referenced Enoch constantly. It was their go-to text to explain the origins of evil and the existence of demons.
But then as the centuries passed, the tide turned violently against it.
It did. As the institutional church formalized its canon, and as rabbinic Judaism reorganized itself after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, authorities began to distance themselves from Enoch.
Why? If everyone loved it, what changed?
It became too dangerous.
Dangerous how?
Enoch's detailed, graphic descriptions of angels rebelling, possessing secret knowledge, and interacting physically with humanity were deemed far too controversial.
It made the angels look bad.
It painted a picture of a universe where the divine hierarchy was fragile and easily corrupted. For an institutional church trying to establish order and authority, a book that says the angels themselves can't be trusted is a major theological liability.
And they didn't just quietly put it back on the shelf, right? They actively tried to destroy it.
Oh, absolutely. The source notes that Rabbi Simeon ben Jotai in the 2nd century pronounced a literal curse upon anyone who believed the book.
A curse.
A literal curse. And a later church father, named Philastrius, condemned it openly as heresy. So it was denounced, banned, its scrolls were likely burned, and it was completely lost to the Western world for roughly 1,000 years.
1,000 years.
Yes. This is actually a great moment to unpack the concept of apocrypha. We use that word today in a somewhat derogatory way to mean a story that is untrue, fabricated, or of doubtful authenticity.
Yeah, like an apocryphal tale.
Right. But originally, the word comes from a Greek root meaning hidden or secret.
So it wasn't originally an insult.
Not at all. As our source points out, in the ancient world, the term might have actually been a high compliment. It was applied to sacred books whose contents were considered too exalted, too deeply mystical, or too dangerously revealing to be made available to the general, uneducated public.
They were the hidden books for the initiated.
Exactly. But over time, as the authorities decided these books were too dangerous, hidden became synonymous with heretical.
That is fascinating. So the book vanishes. It's like a legendary, lost, deleted scene from a famous movie. Everyone talks about it. There are rumors it exists, but no one has the film reel.
Until 1773.
Right. We jump to the year 1773. A Scottish explorer named James Bruce is traveling. And he's not just traveling anywhere. He is searching for the source of the Blue Nile in Ethiopia.
And while he's there, he makes one of the greatest literary discoveries in human history.
Tell us about that.
Well, James Bruce found that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, because they had been geographically isolated from Rome and Constantinople for centuries, never got the memo that Enoch was banned.
They just kept reading it.
They had preserved the Book of Enoch perfectly, keeping it right alongside Genesis and Exodus as a fully canonical book of their Bible.
That is incredible.
Bruce managed to acquire 3 complete copies in the ancient Ge'ez language, the liturgical language of Ethiopia, and brought them back to Europe.
I can only imagine the shock in the academic world. Here's this mythic text suddenly sitting on a desk in Paris or London.
It was an academic earthquake, and its authenticity and antiquity were further cemented centuries later, in the 1950s.
Oh, right, the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yes. Fragments of the Book of Enoch, written in Aramaic, were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. It proved definitively that this text wasn't a medieval forgery.
It was the real deal.
It was ancient, dating back to at least 200 to 300 years before Christ. It was a cornerstone of ancient apocalyptic thought. By suppressing this text for millennium, later religious authorities fundamentally changed how Western culture understood its own theology.
They sanitized the narrative of human history.
Completely.
And when you actually open Dr. Winter's translation and read what they sanitized, you immediately understand why they wanted to hide it.
Oh, without a doubt.
Because Enoch takes that tiny, confusing verse in Genesis 6 and explodes it into a dark, sprawling, cosmic epic. It answers the question, what did these angels actually do to warrant a 1,000-year cover-up?
Which brings us to the true villains of the ancient world.
The Watchers.
The Watchers.
Enoch expands on those mysterious sons of God. He gives them a name. He calls them the Watchers. These are a specific class of angels, 200 of them, led by 2 prominent figures named Azazel and Shemhaza.
Their original job was presumably to observe humanity, to watch over the earth.
But they look down from heaven, they see human women, and they are overcome by lust.
But Enoch makes it very clear that their sin was not merely sexual. Their descent to the physical earth, specifically landing on Mount Hermon, a towering peak in the anti-Lebanon mountain range, was a calculated, sworn rebellion.
They planned it out.
Yes. They literally bind themselves with a mutual curse, agreeing to commit this crime together so no single angel takes the fall alone.
Like a cosmic mafia pact.
Exactly like that. They broke a fundamental divine embargo. They crossed a boundary between the heavenly and earthly realms that was never meant to be breached.
And what they did next is where the story shifts from a weird romance to a sci-fi disaster movie. Because they didn't just take wives. They initiated an illicit transfer of heavenly technology to primitive humanity.
The text is incredibly specific about what they taught and who taught it.
Yeah, let's talk about the curriculum. As Azazel, the primary antagonist, taught men how to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates.
He taught them the art of war.
He also taught them metallurgy, the secret of extracting metals from the earth and working them with fire.
And the curriculum goes much further. They taught humanity the use of antimony, which is a metallic element used to beautify the eyelids.
The origins of cosmetics.
Right. They taught about coloring tinctures and precious stones. Other watchers taught astrology, the reading of the stars and the clouds.
They taught root cuttings, which is basically early pharmacology, sorcery, and the making of spells.
So they shared a lot.
Yeah, okay. My mind is blown. So the original sin that caused the flood wasn't just humanity being inherently, naturally bad on their own. It was a cosmic technology transfer.
It is a profound paradigm shift.
It's like a highly advanced alien race landing on Earth and handing nuclear launch codes, advanced bioweaponry, and chemical engineering texts to toddlers. Of course they're going to destroy themselves.
Exactly. It completely changes the context of human evil. In the traditional, sanitized Genesis reading, God looks down, sees humanity's heart is only evil continually, and the blame falls squarely and solely on human shoulders.
We just failed.
Right. But Enoch introduces a deeply tragic element to the human condition. The corruption of humanity wasn't entirely our fault. We were contaminated.
We were manipulated.
Yes, we were handed tools of absolute destruction long before we had the moral maturity to handle them.
I am so struck by the specific list of technologies, though.
Yeah.
Specifically, the inclusion of cosmetics alongside weapons of war. It seems almost comical to a modern reader.
It does sound strange to us.
Like, oh no, the Dark Angels taught us how to forge battle axes and apply eyeliner. Why on earth did the ancient authors consider makeup to be an apocalyptic threat on par with swords?
That is a brilliant question, and it cuts to the heart of the Enochian philosophy. What's fascinating here is the underlying philosophical argument about the natural world. Why are metallurgy and cosmetics linked? Because both of them require altering the natural, God-given state of creation.
How do you mean?
Think about it from an ancient agrarian perspective. Metallurgy requires digging into the earth, extracting things that were hidden, and using extreme fire to manipulate matter to create unnatural, indestructible tools of death.
Weapons alter the earth to create violence.
Yes, and cosmetics and tinctures in the ancient mind do the exact same thing to the human body. They alter the natural human appearance to create an unnatural, intoxicating desire.
Oh, wow.
Both are forms of ultimate deception. Both are a rejection of the world as God created it. The Watchers are essentially teaching humanity how to play God.
How to manipulate biology, chemistry, and earth sciences for power, vanity, and seduction.
Exactly.
Makes so much sense. To an ancient shepherd, a sudden explosion of urban technology, mining, forging, chemical dyes would look like black magic.
It would look like the world being torn apart.
The Book of Enoch is essentially a theological reaction against sudden, violent technological acceleration.
Precisely. They weren't just evolving, they were being artificially accelerated by rebellious divine beings with an agenda.
But the Watchers didn't just share their dangerous knowledge, they shared their DNA.
Yes, they did.
And the results of that biological mixing were catastrophically terrifying.
This brings us to the physical manifestation of this cosmic rebellion, the offspring, the anomaly that broke the ecosystem.
The union of these celestial watchers and human women produced something that was never meant to exist. The giants, the Nephilim.
And according to the Enochian text, we are not talking about humans who were 7 feet tall. The text specifies their size, and it is horrifying.
The translation says they were 3,000 ells tall.
Now, let's contextualize that measurement. The exact measurement of an L in this specific ancient context can be debated by scholars. It's roughly the length from a man's elbow to his fingertips, about 18 inches.
Okay.
So if we take the text literally, 3,000 L's is 4,500 feet.
That is nearly a mile high.
That is nearly a mile high.
That is Godzilla. That's not a giant, that's a walking mountain.
Right. Now, whether the ancient author meant that literally or was using hyperbole to convey unfathomable scale, the literary point is undeniable.
These beings were unbelievably, mythically massive.
They were an apex predator introduced into an ecosystem that could not possibly support them.
The text describes their progression so vividly, and it reads like a horror story.
It really does.
At first, the humans were in awe of them. They tried to feed them. They brought them all the vegetables and grain, all the acquisitions of men. But the giants' appetites were insatiable.
And when the humans could no longer sustain them, the giants turned on humanity itself. They started devouring mankind.
And when they ran out of humans, they turned on nature. They ate birds, beasts, reptiles, and fishes. And eventually, driven by this endless void of hunger, they turned on each other, committing cannibalism and drinking blood.
It is a picture of total ecological and moral collapse. The earth is screaming. Our related text found alongside Enoch at Qumran, called the Book of Giants, elaborates on this specific horror.
What does that one say?
It describes these beings slaughtering 400,000 righteous people. It even mentions them slaying dragons, which our source notes could be an ancient term for massive reptiles or dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs.
Nothing was safe. The earth was quite literally being eaten alive by these abominations.
And this is the light bulb moment for me. When you read this, the flood narrative in Genesis suddenly makes total absolute sense. It completely recontextualizes the story of Noah.
How so?
Well, if you grew up hearing the Noah's Ark story, you probably pictured a boat full of cute giraffes and a nice rainbow. It was framed as God getting angry at humans for lying and stealing, so he drowns everyone, which honestly seems like a severe overreaction.
It creates a massive theological problem of a disproportionately wrathful God.
Right. But with the Enochian context, God wasn't just a petty deity wiping out a few misbehaving humans. The biosphere was literally being devoured by a mutant race of mile-high hybrid giants who were armed with angelic weaponry.
The flood wasn't an act of petty vengeance.
No. It was a desperate, necessary measure to cleanse the earth of an invasive supernatural species that was threatening to consume all life. It was cosmic pest control.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of Genesis, it explains a very peculiar phrase used to describe Noah.
What phrase?
Genesis 6, verse 9 says, Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. In the context of the Enochian worldview, blameless doesn't just mean moral purity, it highly implies genetic purity.
Whoa!
Noah and his family were among the few remaining humans whose bloodlines had not been compromised by the Watchers.
So God's judgment had to be absolute to eradicate the Nephilim threat. If even one survived, the contagion would spread again.
Exactly.
Wait, I have a question here. If God is omnipotent and these Watchers are bound by his rules, why didn't he just stop the technology transfer before it started? Why let them teach humanity how to make swords or let them breed these giants in the first place? Why wait until the earth is destroyed?
That is the eternal problem of theodicy, the problem of evil. Enoch doesn't give us a direct philosophical treatise on free will, but the narrative suggests that boundaries, once set by God, must be respected by both humans and angels.
So the Watchers had a choice.
The Watchers had agency. They chose to break the boundary. God allows the consequences of that breach to play out to their horrific logical conclusion before stepping in.
It's a terrifying lesson in cause and effect.
It is.
And when God finally does step in, his judgment in Enoch is incredibly precise and brutal. Before the rain even starts, God hears the cries of the dying earth. He sends the 4 unfallen archangels, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, to clean up the mess.
They are the cosmic SWAT team.
Yeah, they are sent to bind the Watchers. Azazel is bound hand and foot and thrown into a dark, jagged, subterranean prison in the desert to await final judgment. Shemhaza is tied up and forced to watch the destruction of his offspring.
And Gabriel gets a very specific, chilling mission.
What did he do?
Gabriel is sent directly to the giants. But rather than striking them down with lightning, he is ordered to incite a civil war among them.
A civil war.
God tells Gabriel to destroy the children of the Watchers from amongst men by sending them against one another. He turns these massive brothers against each other, ensuring they destroy themselves in mutual slaughter before the floodwaters even arrive.
That is brutal.
It is a harsh, terrible justice. The Watchers are chained in darkness, forced to listen to their beloved monstrous children hack each other to pieces.
It's a staggering narrative of divine retribution. So the civil war happens, the flood comes, the earth is scrubbed clean, the physical bodies of the giants are drowned, hacked apart, and destroyed. Mission accomplished, the world is saved. Right? Because there's a metaphysical loophole that the Watchers created. You can drown a giant's physical body under miles of water, but what happens to its soul?
This brings us to perhaps the most enduring theological contribution of the Book of Enoch. It provides a highly specific, logical, and terrifying origin story for the demonic realm.
Enoch points out that because the giants were born of a forbidden union spirit from the angels and flesh from the humans, they had a dual nature. They were a biological and spiritual anomaly in the architecture of the universe.
Exactly. The universe has rules for death. When a normal human dies, their physical body returns to the dust, and their spirit goes to its appointed place in the afterlife Sheol, in the ancient Hebrew mindset.
And for angels.
When an angel falls or rebels, it is bound in heavenly chains or cast into the abyss. But the giants belonged nowhere.
They were a glitch in the cosmic system.
Yes. When their massive physical bodies died in the civil war or the flood, their spirits were released. But because they were born of the earth, they couldn't ascend to heaven. And because they were part celestial spirit, they couldn't simply pass into Sheol like a normal human soul.
So they were stranded.
They were stranded.
The text explicitly says they became disembodied evil spirits condemned to wander the earth. And here's the truly creepy part. Because they no longer have physical stomachs or bodies, they take no physical food, but they still suffer from the feeling of hunger and thirst.
They have phantom appetites.
They still crave the blood and the violence they enjoyed as physical giants, but they have no way to consume it. So what do?
They seek out physical bodies to inhabit.
They possess humans, they cause disease, they afflict the mind, and they incite wars. They use humans as meat suits to experience the physical world again.
This solves an ancient, profound theological problem that theologians wrestled with for centuries. If God created a perfect world and God is entirely good, where did evil spirits come from? Why do demons exist if God didn't make them?
And what's the Enochian answer?
The answer is incredibly elegant in its tragedy. God didn't create demons. They are the tragic, lingering echoes of a supernatural crime They are the toxic byproduct of the Watcher's rebellion.
I am just struck by how this ties the entire ancient mythological world together. The demons of the ancient world, the things that Jesus is casting out in the New Testament, aren't fallen angels themselves.
No, they are the ghost children of the fallen angels.
They are the spirits of the Nephilim. And our source connects this directly to another apocryphal text, which I find absolutely fascinating, the Testament of Solomon. Can we dive into that for a minute?
Absolutely. The Testament of Solomon is a later text, but it is deeply soaked in the Enochian worldview. In this text, King Solomon is granted a magical signet ring by the archangel Michael.
Which sounds like pure fantasy, like Lord of the Rings.
It does sound like fantasy, but this ring gives Solomon the power to summon, interrogate, and command demons, essentially forcing them to help build the great temple in Jerusalem.
But what does this reveal about demonology?
Well, it reveals exactly how the ancients viewed it. In the text, Solomon uses the ring to summon a demon. The creature appears with gleaming eyes, and Solomon asks, "Who are you? Where do you come from?"
And what does the demon say?
The demon explicitly admits, "I am a lascivious spirit, engendered of a giant man who died in the massacre in the time of the giants."
That is incredible. It is a direct, explicit continuation of the Enoch narrative.
Yes.
The demon is literally saying, I am the ghost of a Nephilim who died in Gabriel's civil war before the flood.
It is. Solomon proceeds to interrogate dozens of these spirits, forcing them to reveal their names, their specific astrological associations, and which angelic names drive them away. He then seals these spirits in brazen vessels.
And didn't the Knights Templar allegedly find those?
According to much later medieval legends, yes. When the Knights Templar were excavating under the Temple Mount during the Crusades, they supposedly found these vessels and unleashed the spirits again.
Which is a whole other rabbit hole of history and conspiracy.
It certainly is.
But what it shows is how pervasive and literal this belief was. The ancient people didn't view demons as abstract psychological concepts of evil. They viewed them as the literal disembodied remnants of a specific historical catastrophe.
Exactly. It makes the spiritual warfare of the ancient world incredibly visceral. When you are fighting a demon, you aren't fighting a vague concept. You are fighting the hungry ghost of an ancient giant who wants to use your body to eat and kill again.
It grounds the spiritual realm in a deeply historical, traumatic narrative. The earth is haunted by the mistakes of the angels.
It really is.
Which brings us back to the man whose name is on the cover of the book. Amidst all this cosmic horror, the technology transfer, the giants, the civil war, the demons, where is Enoch?
That is the central irony of the text. As the world is descending to absolute madness and physical destruction, Enoch is elevated. He is taken out of the mud and brought into the divine courtroom.
Enoch is described in the text as the scribe of righteousness.
Yeah.
And while the Watchers, these massive, powerful, terrifying celestial beings who taught humanity how to forge swords and read the stars, realize that God is about to destroy them, they panic.
They are terrified of God's wrath.
And because they've broken the embargo, God has completely stopped speaking to them. They have no line of communication to the divine, so they need a lawyer.
And in a massive subversion of cosmic expectations, who do they hire?
They hire a human, they go to Enoch, a mere mortal walking around in the dirt, and they beg him to write a petition to God on their behalf.
They want mercy.
They want a second chance. Specifically, they are heartbroken over their giant children. They beg Enoch to ask God that their giant sons might be allowed to live for 500 years instead of being immediately destroyed in the Civil War.
This raises a vital point about the hierarchy of the cosmos in ancient thought.
How so?
The Watchers were originally created to be intermediaries. They were supposed to deliver divine decrees downward from God to humanity. Now, because of their sin, the roles were completely inverted.
They are begging a human to deliver a decree upward to God.
Exactly. The celestial beings are relying on a mortal scribe to save them.
And God's response, delivered through Enoch, is a devastating cosmic reversal. Enoch goes into a vision, receives the verdict, and comes back to the Watchers. He essentially reads them the divine riot act.
Yes, he does.
God tells Enoch to say to the Watchers, "You should intercede for men and not men for you."
It is the ultimate divine mic drop.
It really is.
It is a profound statement on responsibility. The Watchers abandoned their post, corrupted their celestial nature, and shattered the physical world, and now they want to hide behind a fragile human to avoid the consequences.
And God just refuses the petition completely.
There is absolutely no forgiveness for the Watchers. Their chains are permanent, and their sons' days are numbered. The sentence is final.
But for his faithfulness, for being the one righteous man willing to stand in the gap, Enoch is rewarded with something no living human had ever experienced. The text says he is translated or taken up into heaven.
And his description of heaven is so completely different from the fluffy clouds and harps imagery we are used to in pop culture.
Yeah, it doesn't look like a painting.
How does he describe it?
He describes approaching a massive wall built of crystals, surrounded by tongues of living fire. He enters a house built of crystal blocks, where the ceiling is like the path of the stars, and flaming cherubim are everywhere.
It sounds almost mechanical.
It does. He describes a second house, even larger, entirely built of fire. It sounds almost sci-fi, like he's walking through a massive, terrifying celestial engine room or a crystalline motherboard of the universe.
It is an apocalyptic vision of ultimate, unyielding reality. Contrast that with what is happening on Earth.
Right.
While the Earth below is a chaotic, bloody mud pit filled with warring giants and dying humans, heaven is presented as a realm of pristine, terrifying, crystalline order. Fire and ice. Absolute purity.
And while there, Enoch is granted visions of the secrets of the universe. He sees the storehouses of the winds, the cornerstones of the earth.
But most importantly, he is granted visions of the end of the world, the final judgment, and the coming of that elect one who will set all things right.
We've talked about how wildly popular this book was before it was banned. Why do you think this specific narrative, the Watchers, the giants, the crystalline heaven, the impending judgment, resonated so deeply with early believers, particularly in the centuries right before and after Christ?
Because it is fundamentally a narrative about ultimate, inescapable cosmic justice.
Cosmic justice.
Think about the audience reading this text in the 2nd century BCE or the 1st century CE. They were Jewish and early Christian communities living under massive, oppressive, violent empires. First the Greeks, then the Romans.
They were ruled by kings and emperors who seemed utterly untouchable.
Who possessed overwhelming military technology and who consumed the resources of the earth while the poor starved.
They were living under the boots of modern giants.
Exactly. The Roman legions, with their advanced swords and armor, the very things Azazel taught humanity to make, were the new Nephilim.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
The Book of Enoch promises those oppressed communities that the corrupt systems of the world are not natural. They parallel the ancient violence of the giants and the forbidden power of the Watchers.
And just as God judged the Watchers and drowned the Nephilim, he will eventually judge the empires of today.
Yes. It assures the oppressed that systemic evil is an anomaly, a corruption of the system, and that the elect one will eventually clean the slate and restore the pristine, crystalline order of heaven to earth.
It is a literature of profound hope for the marginalized.
It truly is.
That is incredibly powerful. It changes it from a weird monster story into a political and spiritual survival guide. And I just marvel at the sheer scale of the journey we've taken today.
It's been a massive journey.
We started with 4 confusing, easily ignored verses in Genesis 6 about the sons of God, and we ended up in a crystalline heaven watching a human lawyer advocate for fallen angels while a mutant race of giants devoured the ecosystem below.
It really highlights how much we miss when we only read the abridged version of history.
It certainly proves that reading these ancient foundational texts requires more than just skimming the surface. You have to understand the historical context, the lost traditions, and the deeply held beliefs that the original authors assumed you already knew.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
Well, when you look at the Book of Genesis now, you can't unsee the shadow of this massive, suppressed epic. The creation and flood stories aren't just simple fables about human morality or God getting frustrated with a disobedient creation.
They are about cosmic boundaries.
Yes. They are about the dangers of forbidden technology, the terrifying consequences of mixing the divine with the mortal, and the absolute necessity of maintaining the delicate balance of the natural world.
Understanding texts like the Book of Enoch completely recontextualizes the literature, the mythology, and the theology of the entire Western world.
It shows us exactly how ancient people processed the complex ideas of systemic evil, the terror of sudden technological advancement, and the reality of human suffering.
They didn't view evil as a vague, abstract concept. They viewed it as a historical contagion that had to be actively, physically, and spiritually fought.
And it leaves you with one final, haunting idea from the text to ponder. We talked about how the physical bodies of those ancient giants were destroyed in the flood, Their spirits, their insatiable, hungry spirits, were never actually destroyed.
According to Enoch and the traditions that followed, they were left to wander the earth, formless, forever craving the physical world they once devoured.
So the next time you look at the news and you see the inexplicable chaos, the endless appetite for war, the insatiable greed, and the systemic corruption in our modern world, you have to wonder, is it really just human nature? Or are the hungry ghosts of the Nephilim still walking among us?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We will see you next time.